I'm back, but I'm still mad. But anyway, the reason I started the stream back up is I actually intended to do something, but forgot when I started the stream, and I just now remembered to do it. So I'm back to do that, and what that is reading the Black Records, because now that I have all of them, I can read all of them and get a better understanding of the lore of Erebonia and what's going on. So let's do that, shall we? We got a lot of stuff to go through. So, without further ado, let's do it. The War of the Lions begins. Year 947. In the year 947, Emperor Valius V passed away. His death heralded the beginning of the largest scale civil war in Erebonian history. Valius V was a ruler I can read. My brain definitely hasn't turned to mush because of what just happened in the story, guys. I promise I can still read English at like a first grade level, okay? Valius V was a ruler with a somewhat debaucherous reputation, and is said to have had countless wives and concubines. To further complicate the matter of succession, many of those wives came from prestigious noble families, all of whom began competing for power and wanted their offspring to take the throne. Within days of Valius V's death, Crown Prince Manfred, the son of his first wife, was assassinated by an unknown party. Following the death of the Crown Prince, the fourth prince and son of the first Emperor Valius' secondary wives, Prince Orthros, seized the capital by force. Once in control, he declared himself the new emperor and began purging all those who dared oppose him. The coup set off a succession of counterclaims, and three other princes also named themselves to be the new emperor. Backed by the powerful noble families of their mothers, the competing princes ignited a bloody 5-year-long civil war, and thus the War of the Lions began. At first, the princes' armies were largely equal in terms of strength. It wasn't until Orthros, who would later become known as the False Emperor, revived the being that had long been sealed under the city, that the balance of power shifted. The Testarossa, the legendary Vermilion Knight, now tainted by the blood of Zoro Agruga, saw the light of day once more. With its unmatched strength under his control, Orthros decimated his greatest competition in one fell swoop, and the fifth prince, Gunnar, was defeated. It seemed inevitable that the armies of the other princes would share the same fate, but it was at this pivotal point that the war took yet another surprising and sudden turn. The unexpected development came in the form of another great knight, the Palatinate Knight. The famed champion was acquired by Prince Lucius, the sixth and youngest of the feuding brothers, and with its power he was able to defeat the army of the brilliant strategist and second prince, Albert. Victorious and backed by the knight's power, Prince Lucius was poised to challenge Orthros. Prince Gunnar and Albert's armies, however, were not completely wiped out, and decided to join forces with one another in order to oppose the other princes. It was thus that the war became one fought by three separate groups: Prince Orthros with the Vermilion Knight, Prince Lucius with the Palatinate Knight, and Princes Gunnar and Albert, who had no knight but compensated with their sheer numbers. The War of the Lions had been raging for 2 years now, and the chaos only worsened by the day. Erebonia seemed fated to fall into ruin and darkness, fitting, perhaps, for a nation that takes its name from Erebos. Okay, so this is going back almost 600 years from that. 200 years after Heimdall was first founded, ruin rose on monstrous wings from the depths of the earth. Its name was Zoro Agruga, the Dark Dragon, a malevolent creature of terrible power. It spread a miasma throughout the capital that turned Heimdall into a city of the dead. But the horrors did not end there. The evil dragon desecrated the corpses of the fallen, taking control of their bodies and using them to attack those who remained alive, further increasing the legions of the dead. The emperor at the time, Astorius II, was forced to flee the city with what remained of his household and citizens. Together they retreated south and established a new capital in the land of St. Arc. Not gonna lie, this sounds like the beginning to, like, every Fire Emblem ever. Just about. For 100 years, the Bane of Heimdall went unchallenged until Hector I, the 7th Emperor of Erebonia, resolved to recapture the city. Time had proved an ally to the beast, however, and the dragon's influence had spread over the surrounding area like a plague. Undaunted, Hector I led an army of brave knights into the necropolis in an attempt to free it. But though their hearts were steadfast, their arrival was met by legions of powerful fiends, and their efforts seemed doomed to end in failure. It was then that Hector I had a fateful encounter with none other than the great Vermilion Knight Testarossa. The knight recognized Hector I as its master, and bolstered by its immense power and countless weapons, the Emperor moved once again on the city, and to the decisive encounter with the Dark Dragon. The battle shook the city to its core, and at the end, the Vermilion Knight was victorious. The Scourge of Heimdall, the Dark Dragon, was defeated. However, the price of victory was steep. The corrupted blood that flowed from the dragon claimed Hector's life and defiled even the knight itself, placing a curse upon it. The noble Testarossa became the Crimson Calamity, a demon with 1,000 weapons that only reacts to the blood of the Arnor family. A destructive force on par with the Dark Dragon that, should control of it ever be lost, would threaten the world and all who live in it. It was sealed deep underground, never intended to again see the light of day. Meanwhile, a new city rose from the ashes of the old, and people once again began to gather in Heimdall. That was when the Vermilion capital that endures to this day was first built. Okay, now we're going back to the War of the Lions, 2 years after this start. So I'm guessing this is after the war formed its 3 main factions, and Dreikel's is about to become a 4th or something. Anyway, Dreikel's takes up arms, year 949. A young man lays on a grassy plain, enjoying a nap in the peaceful setting. Before long, however, his rest was interrupted by the arrival of a second young man on horseback. The youth wore the trappings of a knight, and his expression was deathly serious. His armor bore many rents and scratches, and his left arm was bound in a bloody bandage. The first young man had not seen him in several years, but a cheerful reunion did not seem to be his purpose. "You were right after all," the second man said gravely. "At this rate, the Empire's days are numbered." At this, the first man rose from the grass. He was none other than the third prince of the Erebonian Empire, Prince Dreikel. As a man with no claim to the throne due to his commoner mother and shunned by the other highborn princes, Dreikel had long since left Erebonia behind, wandering from place to place and whiling away his days. 3 years prior, he had reached the land of Nord, where he had remained ever since. Though left to his own devices since childhood, his nature was noble, and he was quickly accepted by the people of Nord, and lived peacefully among them. But while he had left his homeland, he had not truly abandoned it in his heart. During his wanderings, his mother had passed away, but while she lived, she had told him something that would remain with him for the rest of his days. "The blood flowing through you will not allow you to turn your back on the Empire's suffering." Prince Dreikel had turned those words over in his head again and again. What could a powerless vagrant like himself truly hope to do? The knight's arrival, however, signified 2 things: that the war continued to worsen, and that Erebonia was on a certain path to ruination. His mother was probably correct. Hearing the knight's words, he decided that enough was enough. He could ignore the pain of his countrymen no longer. That knight, incidentally, was called Roland. He was a childhood friend of Dreikel's and his confidant. He was also the man who Dreikels had left in charge of things in his place before leaving the country. Prince Dreikels set about preparing to depart, but before he could finish, he was met by several of the tall knights of Nord, their cross-shaped spears in hand. They, too, were close friends of Dreikels, and they volunteered to accompany him and Roland, fearing that the two men alone would not stand a chance. The next morning, the prince departed the village, a mere 17 men under his command. They bade farewell to the people of his settlement, and its elder wished them well. "May the winds and the goddess be with you," he blessed them. "Fortune favor you all." 17 people, huh? You know, that sounds roughly around the amount of people that's in Class 7, more or less. I'm sure that's a pure coincidence. The gods of creation, before Septian calendar. In the beginning, there were two great gods. One boasted unrivaled courage, the other unparalleled fortitude. They descended from the heavens with their kin, and it was upon the dark land below that they first met. Calamity. Their opposing natures incompatible, the two were drawn irresistibly into battle, and thus began a struggle that shook heaven and earth. The goddess and the spirits' laments were for naught. As the land quaked, the skies were torn asunder, and the gods' kin could only tremble in fear. After what seemed like an eternity, their clash came to an end, but it was an end of mutual defeat. Their power spent, the empty shells of the two celestial titans were flung to the furthest reaches of the dark land. All that remained in their wake were terrible. Their kin. And the great power. Is that referring to the two Septarians? Because as far as I know, Septarians are considered to be gods. Or does the story of the Septarians just kind of run parallel to an older story? It's kind of unclear. The war comes to an end. 1952. 1952, 952. I can read at least kindergarten level. Prince Dreikels' opponents were the armies of 4th Prince Orthros and his Vermilion Knight, 6th Prince Lucius with his Palatinate Knight, and the combined forces of the remaining princes Gunnar and Albert, who had a legion of magical golems under their control. Yet it was he, the illegitimate son of a cobbler, and a latecomer to the war, who emerged triumphant. Forgive the yawn. I don't even know why. His victory did not come without losses, however. During his return to Erebonia, Roland fell in battle. Not long after that, however, he met a woman who would change his destiny forever. That woman was none other than the daughter of Count Sandlot, who hailed from the lakeside town of Legram. Her charismatic personality and peerless skills with the lance earned her the leadership of a band of knights known as the Eisenritter, and the moniker Lance Maiden. Her name was Leanne Sandlot. Prince Dreikels and Leanne Sandlot may have come from wildly different backgrounds, but their concern for the innocent victims of the war united them in purpose to bring an end to the bloodshed, and it was those shared feelings that made them join forces. The two of them, along with the warriors of Nord, the Eisenritter, and all the other peoples of the nation, whose hearts they moved, liberated one town after another, and were eventually successful in persuading even Prince Lucius, owner of the Palatinate Knight, to fight for their cause. According to your records, you actually wanted to play CS4 until you play... You waited to play CS4? I don't know how you did that, dude. I'm already angry that I'm going to have to be away for a week. Not a month. Oh god, if it was a month. But I'm not going to be able to even touch 4 until I get back from my vacation, and I am quite salty about that. That's the biggest cliffhanger in Trails history. Holy shit. At the same time, however, the false emperor schemed to elevate the cursed Vermilion Knight to even greater power, to godhood. And thus the Vermilion Apocalypse was created. The demonic god emerged in Heimdall alongside a monstrous castle, and vanquished the approaching armies of Albert and Gunnar in a single battle. Their end was anything but conventional, however. They were simply erased from existence. Even the Palatinate Knight could not contend with such a foe and was felled. And as it decimated all who challenged the false emperor, countless crimson spirit veins spread out from the castle, stealing the very life from the capital's citizens, as well as those in the surrounding area. Defeat seemed all but inevitable for Prince Dracos, the Lance Maiden, and their followers, but they refused to give up. Following the guidance of a kindly witch, they were led to a new great knight, which slumbered on the outskirts of Heimdall. Rosilia? Really? Kindly? I don't know if that's the word I would use to describe Rose, if I'm being honest. Maybe these couple hundred years haven't been good to her. She's significantly less kindly now. After overcoming a trial, they were able to claim the Ashen Knight and its power. With it in hand, along with their many supporters in the army of Prince Lucius, they marched on the capital for the final time, eventually making their way to the castle as its center. 3 days later, on the 4th of July, year 952, the castle vanished from existence and the city was liberated. I guess we're not going to get a whole lot of information on how that happened. Okay, now we're getting into the actual Black Records proper. The founding of Heimdall, year 81. In the years following the Great Collapse, Adjudicator Arnor chose Heimdall as his base of operations, from which he planned to rebuild the land of Erebos. Before long, the city became a pillar of the region, and following that, its capital. The citizens, however, continued to suffer in the harsh post-collapse world. They wished for a strong, caring leader to see them through these harsh times. It was in Arnor their wish was granted. After being recognized as an adjudicator by both holy beasts, he was the clear choice. He was crowned as emperor and became the first of many rulers in the Arnor bloodline. Upon his coronation, members of the Septian Church were dispatched from Arteria to endorse the new ruler. I wonder if the times were harsh. I don't know. They might need to tell us a few more times before we can be sure. The people of Zemuria had lost the objects of their worship in the Great Collapse. However, the Church provided them a new way of connecting with Aidios: faith. In addition, by recognizing the legitimacy of rulers across the continent, they strengthened the foundation of its recovering civilizations. In the year 81 of the Septian calendar, the third emperor, Sion Arnor, had a great cathedral built in Heimdall. The cathedral was to be a bastion of faith and would serve as a site to crown future emperors, but it also had held a far more significant role. Unbeknownst to the public, an artificial primal ground was created below the cathedral, a replica of the one that existed below Arteria. With the church's increased presence, the desperate times following the Great Collapse came to an end. The people had lost their civilization, but now had faith to sustain them in their search for light in the Dark Ages. However, 200 years later, the darkness that gripped Erebonia would pull them down to the depths of ruin. One of the holy beasts suddenly disappeared, along with the primal ground below the cathedral. It was that same day that the Dark Dragon's miasma laid waste to Heimdall. 500 years later, the Magic Knights, year 527. 150 years after the recapture of the capital by Emperor Hector, powerful families rose across the empire as the nation began to establish itself once more. Its various regions gradually condensed into a handful of provinces. The families in power were recognized by the emperor and became overseers of their respective provinces, the nobility. Before long, however, they began quarreling over territory, sparking a great many skirmishes between them in the process. During this time, great knights akin to Emperor Hector's Vermilion Knight appeared across the land, and were quickly thrust into the center of these conflicts. The Azure, Palatinate, Ashen, Argent, and Auric Knights were seized by various noble families, granting them overwhelming power and the ability to decide the outcome of battles. Those without the Great Knight's power saw them as bringers of ruin, and before long, certain groups began devoting all of their resources to finding some way to combat these unstoppable threats. Thus gave rise to a new creation of Erebonia's mages, the golems created by powerful spells, the Magic Knights. Like many other groups of the era, the mages were obsessed with the glory of the ancient Gemonians, and devoted themselves wholly to recreating it. Their obsession was funded by an influx of mira from lesser noble families and assistance from a certain faction. Under their supervision, a slew of magic knights was created, all for the sake of combating the unstoppable power of the Great Knights. However, the magic knights were not without flaws. Perhaps their greatest failing is that they were unable to be operated unless they could draw power from active spirit veins. They became a successful countermeasure against the Great Knights, nonetheless, as spirit veins were always disrupted wherever a Great Knight made an appearance. In the year 527, the first golem that could be considered a prototype for the Magic Knights was created in the workshop of a mage serving a formerly powerful but now long-forgotten noble family to the north. At a height of 5 arge, this headless golem, known as Olgadia, became a remnant of the mage's trial and error in developing the other models of Magic Knights. Olgadia. I think I've seen that name before. Was that like the final boss of Trails 1 or something? I think we may have fought it at some point. I don't remember when exactly. Okay, from there we're going ahead 400 years. First ogre fight. Oh yeah, that's right. The Lance Maiden. Year 942. 2 shadows wavered in the corner of a dark underground room, lit only by a small bonfire. I see. So, you feel an overwhelming presence, do you? A young maiden stood before the fire. The faint breeze passing through the underground blew her hair, giving it the appearance of a flowing stream of gold, contrasting with the massive silver lance she held in her arms. Oh? Are you telling me you wish to turn back before we have even begun? If you are, then so be it. This is far beyond the power of mankind. A young blonde-haired woman with red eyes wielding a dimly shining staff. That's Rose! Alright, Fontano. See you later. Thanks for sticking around to enjoy the ending with me, and GG's. I say enjoy, but really I mean experience. I'm not particularly happy at the moment. Understandably so. Anyway. Two shadows wavered in the corner of a dark underground room lit only by a small bonfire. Oh wait, I already read that. I got distracted. Okay, so Rose shows up, the shining staff, answered in an antiquated tone. The maiden shook her head and urged the woman to open the door before her. It bore the crest of a cross, surrounded by spirals. The maiden's name was Leanne Sandlot, the daughter of the Count of Lowingen Castle in the Gram. However, she would be remembered by history as a Lance Maiden. Raised in Legram, known for its masterful teachings of warfare, she displayed skill in the art of battle far surpassing her age. At the young age of 15, she was already a match for the Castle Knights. Said to have godlike mastery of a lance on horseback, it wasn't long before she had completely surpassed the other knights in competitions, amassing a veritable mountain of laurels and awards. The country was amazed by this young girl's incredible talent. The tale of the maiden who was stronger than the knights protecting her spread, and people began to flock to her. At age 16, she began hearing a voice in her head. The voice was austere yet magnanimous, and it told Leanne of the duty she had to fulfill, and the duty she had to accept. Naturally, Leanne was upset by this voice only she could hear. However, it wasn't long until she met its owner, a mysterious woman who called herself a witch. The witch spoke of an entity sealed far below the castle, and of Leanne's duty to become its master. Oh, okay, so Leanne's Divine Knight came from under Lohengrin Castle. And that explains why Lohengrin Castle has a sort of mysticism around it. Okay, makes sense. Its presence was overwhelming, and once claimed, it would bring its wielder great power. Yet it also had the potential to cause great devastation. After much consideration, Leanne made the decision to undergo its trial. It was her way of trying to bring an end to the Empire's conflicts. In addition, as long as she held this power for her own, the noble families would never be able to abuse it. The witch was surprised by Leanne's answer, but recognized her determination and spirit by offering to help her. Thus, the door opened, and the Lancer Maiden and the witch proceeded into the trial. 5 years later, the demise of the Emperor would lead to the beginning of the largest-scale civil war history had ever seen. The War of the Lions. Okay, so she was an Awakener for 5 years before the Civil War even started, which means she already had her Divine Knight when she met Dragos. Okay, that's cool. Alright. The Lionheart Emperor, year 994. Forgive me, you may leave now. Yes, sir. Please call for me if anything happens. The head butler, now in his later years, bowed before leaving. The other man sighed deeply as he lied down on the bed. He was elderly and sick. His well-trained body was as sturdy as a fortress still, and very few would ever doubt the condition of his health. However, he was clearly aging, weakening, and felt his end looming over the horizon. The Lionheart Emperor, otherwise known as Dreikel's Riese Armor. He was the 73rd Emperor, and nearing the age of 70. After ending the 5-year-long civil war known as the War of the Lions, Dreikel's had been working tirelessly for 40 years. Although he was enthroned the year the war ended, he had lost his Nordic friends and parted with the witch. He and his vassals worked hard to restore the Empire. I have no regrets, and no need to worry about the children either. The Empress had also urged him to give up on the thoughts of the past. She was the daughter of a marquis who was assassinated during the Civil War, and although she was much younger than he, they fell deeply in love, and she bore him 2 sons and 2 daughters. Although she passed several years earlier, their children remained healthy and would shoulder the burden of the reconstructed Empire's future. The next generation is being raised as well. In the first half of the war, his best friend, Roland Vander, gave his life to protect him, and now Arnor raised his son. The son was already in his 40s now, and he flourished as a martial arts master while serving as a military officer. Then there was Thor's military academy. He had established the academy 20 years prior. It was a place for the best and the brightest, accepting students from various backgrounds. He'd be surprised. He smiled, thinking of his good friend that had fallen into a deep slumber at the end of the Civil War. The academy had been constructed at the place they'd first met, and where his friend now rested once more. That friend, of course, being a certain Ashen boy, a certain Valimar guy. These long years weren't for nothing, then. As long as I can endure that thing until Adios comes for me, that is. He cast his gaze to the corner of the room. There waited the nameless darkness. Today, it came again to speak to him. begging pathetically, threatening with intimidation, subtly tempting. He knew what it was, ever since that day 40 years ago when he took the throne. I suppose I should be happy my children and their descendants won't suffer the same curse. If he were not a man with the heart of a lion, he would surely have been broken by this daily torment long ago. On this day, however, he had a second visitor. Dracos? An incredibly harmonious voice called out his name, bringing with it a wave of nostalgia. He looked up to see a woman with hair flowing like gold standing at his side. Ooh. Being visited by the still somehow alive and not aging Leanne. With the darkness of the curse just kind of sitting there in the corner of the room. Interesting. Oh, let's go, Salt Pail. This is going to be kind of similar to This is going to be recounting that event that was also covered in Sky 3, I'm pretty sure. The Salt Pail, year 1178. On July 1st, 1178, at 5:45 a.m., a great catastrophe struck North Ambria, then a principality in North Simuria. A giant white pillar suddenly appeared on the outskirts of its capital, Haliask. The pillar was composed of not of snow or ice, but salt. As such, it was named the Salt Pail. A storm of salt spread outward from it, salinifying everything it touched. Despite only lasting a few days, its effects were felt for months afterward, as citizens fled south, seeking refuge. In the immediate aftermath of the catastrophe, the number of victims equaled about 1/8 of the country's population. That number rose to nearly 1/3 of the population with the inclusion of victims in the days that followed. After the incident, the Septian Church led evacuation procedures, provided aid, and employed hundreds from the Bracer Guild to help. In a short time, relief forces from Erebonia, Rimiferia, Jurai, Liberl, and the Republic of Calvard had assembled in North Ambria. Meanwhile, its country's leader, Prince Balmond, who had fled to a neighboring country at the start of the catastrophe, had returned to rebuild the government. However, he was met with violence from the enraged citizens for leaving them behind during their hour of need. In the end, he was forcibly removed from power, and North Ambria became a democracy. The remnants of its former armed forces reformed as the Northern Jaegers. Erebonia, their neighbor to the south, had contradictory views on the autonomous state. On one hand, it refused to recognize the legitimacy of the new democratic government. On the other, it eagerly welcomed the Northern Jaegers. North Ambria's extreme poverty and focus on bringing in foreign currency meant that the former soldiers were easily manipulated by the promise of imperial coin. The Jaeger Corps went around the empire, hiring themselves out to the nobility and newly developing businesses who were fighting over septium and natural resources. They turned out to be the perfect pawns for Erebonia to use in its proxy wars and internal struggles. Despite this, the massive amounts of mira that flowed in from the Empire helped save North Ambria from its dire straits. 27 years after the catastrophe of the Salt Pail, the Empire annexed North Ambria as reparations for the Northern Jaegers' actions in the Erebonian Civil War. As before, Erebonia's vast resources ended up lifting the former independent state out of its chronic poverty. Shortly after the disaster, the Septian Church restricted access to the northern half of the country. After the annexation, however, the Imperial Army's Intelligence Division began investigating the Pale, which had since been classified as an otherworldly singularity. One of the Intelligence Division's collaborators has been able to confirm that members of the Church's Dominion retrieved the Salt Pale and brought it back to Arteria. It's rumored, however, that a piece of the Pale still remains on site in North Ambria. You know, just in case somebody really needs to be salted. Like certain people from academia, maybe. Certain professors. Alright, this is recapping what happened in Sky Second Chapter. The Orbital Shutdown Phenomenon in year 1203. Septian calendar 1203, February. The southern reaches of Sutherland Province. All orbital power came to a sudden stop in the area around Parm and Titus Gate. It had been a relatively mild winter, but without lights, communications, or heaters, the people of Parm found themselves subjected to cold and darkness for an entire week. Sutherland's provincial army was called in to provide aid. After a short investigation, the source of the outage was determined to be a city-sized airship that appeared over Valeria Lake in Liberl, the neighboring kingdom to the south. The floating structure had a height of 5,000 and a length of 3,000 arch. The ancient Zemurian structure drew in nearly all orbital energy from the entirety of Liberl into itself. Thus, the southern reaches of the Erebonia were affected as well. 3 days after the incident began, the Imperial Army's 3rd Armored Division moved with surprising speed from Dreknor Fortress to Parm, and then on to Titus Gate, giving support to those affected along the way. Though the Army's orbital tanks ceased to function near the Empire's southern border, they also had a large number of steam-powered tanks available. Using the combustion-driven models allowed them to get around without relying on orbital energy. Even the cannons themselves used gunpowder ammunition. Though it wasn't ideal, it was enough to allow them to respond to the situation. The leader of the 3rd Armored Division was Lieutenant General Zex Vander, a member of the family tasked with guarding the Imperial family and a moderate in an army led mostly by warhawks. He felt conflicted as he led his division south into Liberlian territory. The government's stated reason for his current orders were to protect the citizens during the power outage and assist Liberl during the current crisis. The strange part was that the steam-powered tanks, which were vastly inferior to the orbital-powered models, had been commissioned by the Imperial government and provided to the army only a month before the incident. Though the 3rd Armored Division was the first to make it to the border, a number of other divisions were on their way. In the end, the military intervention was stopped thanks to Prince Olivert of Erebonia's imperial family and Brigadier General Cassius Bright of the Liberlian army. I mean, also Estelle, Joshua, Princess Claudia, but, you know, let's not pay any attention to those people. Only the 2 big wigs matter. With the arrival of Liberl's functioning airship, the Arcel, as proof that they could handle the situation without Erebonia's assistance, they were given the time they needed to restore power to the region. As orbital energy returned to the southern reaches of the Empire, so did relative peace between the two nations. To certain individuals, however, it was clear that the Faceless, the Anguis of Ouroboros, responsible for engineering the incident, had connections to Erebonia's intelligence division. Yeah, wouldn't surprise me. The small autonomous weapons the Faceless utilized during this period of time would later come to be known as combat shells. Okay. So, I wonder to what degree the Professor had a relationship with the intelligence division of the Empire. That still kind of remains unclear. I don't know what to make of that. Twilight begins, year 1206. That's right now! Between flame and earth, the wavering darkness begins to spin the tale of the end. First, the conflict of the great gods of the second pillar. Second, the fusion of earth and flame, and the completion of the 7 vessels. Third, the beginning of the 1,000-year city, and the acceptance of the Grawl. Fourth, the disappearance of the Holy Beast and the catastrophe of the Whispering Dragons. Fifth, the recapture of the capital and the Vermilion Curse. Sixth, the Lion's War and the sacrifice of the Holy Maiden. Seventh, the appearance of the giant pillar in the north and the unwanted child. Wait, unwanted child? Who might that be referring to? It's referring to the events in North Ambria. Who do we know from North Ambria that might fit that description? I don't know. Maybe, like, Sarah's quote-unquote dad, who led the Northern Jaegers a while back? I don't know how he would fit in. I don't know. Let's move on. 8th, the sacrifice of the village in the 100 Days campaign. 9th, the great blue tree to the east, and the appearance of the cursed castle. Thus, the 1,000-year-old wish was fulfilled. When the sacrifice is made and the ancient blood flows, the path to the Grawl of Erebor shall open. When the tainted holy beast is pierced by the blade of the world's end, and its blood fills the Grawl, the great twilight shall fall upon the land. And that's where the game cuts off. Right when that happens. Oh dear. We got one game to deal with this whole mess. And I have no idea what's gonna happen. How we're even gonna begin to start tackling this craziness. Jesus Christ. Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. That is the Black Records. A lot of the information was stuff we already knew, but it did provide, further details or clarification on stuff that was just kind of, sort of referenced, but not really explained leading up to this. I am kind of left with a question, though. Like, the prophecies, obviously, were foretelling certain events that lead to the Great Twilight, but at least as far as the Vermilion Night, or Vermilion Apocalypse appearing in Heimdall, and whatever happened to start the Twilight here, most of that was steered in that direction on purpose by Osborn for some reason. I still don't know why he wants to do what he does, but he's like, yeah, sure, let's curse the whole world and just bring it to worldwide war. Why not? Sounds like a good time. Oh, but you can bet we're gonna make him answer a few things in the next game. My god. This is some shit, man. Osborn's the worst. Also, one of the greatest villains in gaming history, but also the worst, and I hate him. And he can go suck a big dick. But yeah. Anyway, that was why I came back and restarted the stream, because I wanted to read those Black Records and get some more lore and background on everything that's leading up to wherever the 4th game is going, which I can't begin to imagine. But yeah, that's going to do it for me. I'm going to go ahead and bid you all good night. And again, this is my last stream before going on vacation. Thank you all very much for sticking around and coming along this ridiculous roller coaster that is the Trail series with me. And once again, when I come back from my vacation, we're going to be picking up the final installment that's currently translated, which is Trails of Cold Steel 4. And then, once we finish that, it's going to be mostly waiting for Hachimari to get translated. But yeah, thank you all very much for sticking with me all this time. It's been loads of fun. It's been a wild ride. And I'll see you guys in a week. Peace out, dudes.